Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Joe Tusman, and you're back on equal footing. Guys, got a trigger warning tonight. Sometimes we're asked for trigger warnings from our more Orthodox Jewish listeners. We are in a Jewish network, but we don't shy away from difficult subjects. But here we go in case you don't want to listen to this. Okay? Tonight's show is about the peculiar and complex journey from Judaism to Catholicism. We're not making any value judgments about it. I know it may upset folks to hear about. It is a trend, statistically. We'll talk a little bit about the numbers. Small numbers on an absolute basis that have gotten larger over recent years. It's also something that's been going on for centuries. We're talking about willful conversion, not forced conversion, not even conversion by transactional circumstance or even because of pikuach nefesh, the dynamic of people converting to Catholicism in order to avoid persecution under the Inquisition or during the Holocaust. There were many instances of that were appropriate at the time, and those conversions ended up being reversed, and others were in a certain sense reversed generations later by families reflecting on their past. That being said, what we're talking about tonight is different. It's willful conversion. In contemporary times, folks that were born Jewish, brought up Jewish, or brought up certainly with the Jewish identity, if not a strong Jewish education, theologically, who then find their spiritual home in Catholicism. And yes, Catholicism in particular. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard about Messianic Jews, their evangelist movements. Some folks that were either grew up Jewish or not, but make the claim that the historical figure that we call Jesus was the Mashiach, was the Messiah. And that's a different story, not altogether, because of course there's similar theology within the Catholic Church, needless to say, but we're not talking about kind of a proselytic movement, the Jews to Jesus movement, or we're talking about individual stories, individual journeys of faith from Judaism to Catholicism. And this touches on issues that I'm sure are shared by some of our listeners around interfaith families, marriages, and so forth. It's not the same thing, but some of these circumstances will be resonant in that regard. And as always on this show, we believe that there's nothing wrong with talking about things, understanding different people's perspectives, and ultimately being able to address even the most controversial topics with civility. All right, we're going to dive into this in a moment. Before we introduce our guest, let me just tell you that you, the listener, are such an important part of the program. I'm going to lead with our numbers instead of giving out the telephone numbers to participate either by voice or by text after our first segment, which is often what we do. Here are the numbers. To text in a comment or question, or a number if you feel more comfortable doing that, you can always do that by SMS or by WhatsApp to 917-428-4062. That's 917-428-4062 to text in. Don't call that number, please. But to text or WhatsApp in a comment or question to our guests. If you want to participate live on the air, you can call 718-303-9090 from the United States or abroad. That calls from Brazil and Israel, etc. before. 718-303-9090 to discuss this unusual controversial topic of conversion from Judaism to Christianity, more specifically from Judaism to Catholicism. And when you call, if you call, you don't have to say your name. You can do so anonymously. All right, well, I'm going to introduce two wonderful human beings who are here not anonymously, bravely on a Jewish network talking about something that can often raise hackles for Jewish listeners. Let's start with Professor Roy Shulman. Professor Shulman was born and raised Jewish parents. Of course, they had fled Nazi Germany. Growing up, he received a thorough Jewish education, followed by a bachelor's degree of science from MIT, an MBA magna cum laude from Harvard Business School, where he then joined the faculty of Harvard Business School as a professor of marketing. And while at Harvard Business School, he experienced two supernatural experiences, which I'll let him describe in his own words, one of Jesus and one of the Virgin Mary, and this resulted in unanticipated and enthusiastic entry ultimately into the Catholic Church. Professor Shulman writes, speaks, and teaches on Catholic theology. He focuses on the relationship between Judaism and the Catholic Church. He's written 2 best-selling books published by Ignatius Press. I recommend them if you want to dive into this topic. Salvation is from the Jews, his first book from 2003, The Role of Judaism in Salvation History, and Honey from the Rock, 16 Jews Find the Sweetness of Christ. He's taught theology at Ave Maria University, Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and he hosts a weekly Catholic radio show. I really appreciate Professor Shulman you being on today and skipping your show for the day on Radio Maria. He also has a daily internet live stream. He appears frequently on EWTN television and radio shows, et cetera, et cetera. He's given talks, missions, and retreats throughout the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and South and Central America. Professor Shulman, welcome to Equal Fitting. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Professor, you're joined by someone I think you know already. You guys knew each other coincidentally before both being booked on the show, and very much appreciate the presence of you, Melissa Presser. Melissa is a Jewish girl, these are her own words, who was led home to the Catholic Church by St. Edith Stein. We'll probably address Edith Stein on the show, a fellow late Jewish Catholic. Melissa is a wife, a mother of 3. She's an attorney. She's a Catholic writer, an author, a content creator on Twitter as well. Melissa is currently working on her memoir about her conversion from Judaism, ultimately to the Catholic Church, called Walk the Land. Her journey of conversion has also occurred alongside a journey of healing around sexual abuse trauma, something we've addressed on the show quite openly in the past. Melissa, she experienced that as a child. I'm sorry. Melissa Presser's relationship with God began as early as the age of 3. She was born and raised in a Jewish family, but she was the only practicing member of her family in Judaism. She attended temple as a young child, and she had a bat mitzvah. As Melissa struggled through sexual abuse trauma, her quest for the truth led her to root deeper into her Jewish faith. And when her beloved grandmother died in 2007, she decided to walk away from the God of her youth. Years later, in her own words, as her life was falling apart, Melissa reached out to a friend's mom and asked to go to church. And there, and we'll hear about this, I'm sure, she had an undeniable, in her words, encounter with Jesus and never turned back. You can visit Melissa's website as well at melissapresser.com, last name Presser, melissapresser.com. Melissa, thanks for being on Equal Footing on such a sensitive subject.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to be here with Dr. Shulman and with Professor Shulman.
I hope, Professor Shulman and Melissa, you will feel truly welcome. I know coming into the show you had some concerns. This is, classified as Jewish media, although we really, again, try to keep an open mind and talk about even the most sensitive of subjects. The idea here is to understand, not to criticize, to understand. So, Melissa, maybe you could start us off. In your bio, I went through a little bit of your journey, and in both your and Professor Shulman's cases, as we were doing pregame research for the show, it seems to know in the case of many people who have converted from Judaism to Catholicism, there is, I'm not sure I know the right theological term, but there's some sort of epiphany. There's an experience that individual has with the historical figure we call Jesus, or one of the other figures of prominence within Catholic theology. Can you tell us a little bit about what that encounter or experience was?
Sure. I think you mentioned it in my bio. I was very dark period of my life. I felt that, what I called at the time, something within me, maybe we call it intuition or makes sure felt, in the church we call it the Holy Spirit. I didn't know that at the time. And I went to church with my good friend's mom, and there was a traveling preacher there at the time, and I was nervous being a Jewish girl in the church, and this traveling preacher started talking about all of the things that were going on in my life, and I turned to my friend's mom, and I was angry, and I said, how could you possibly have betrayed me like this? And she said, Melissa, I never told the word to this man. I don't even know who this man is. This is God. This is God speaking to you. And I was very confused. I had never had an experience in my life like that. insecurities, very confusing, and I was also very suicidal at the time. And so that night I went home, and there were three pictures of my children. I had three young children at the time, and I got on my knees. And after that experience I had had at church, and I said, I see this, I don't know who you are, but you're my last God, basically, and you saved me, you saved my life, and I will serve you for the rest of my life. And the next thing I know, I feel someone picking me off the ground and placing me in my bed. And I wake up the next day, and all that pain had dissipated, was gone. And I made good on my commitment by becoming a Christian.
Had you had exposure to Catholic liturgy or Catholic theology in general prior to this kind of personal religious experience?
No, I had no. This experience happened in a non-denominational church because I was in a non-denominational movement for a little while before I became a Catholic. But I had no experience with Christian theology, Catholic theology. I had no Catholic friends. All of my friends were most of them were Jewish, or they were non-practicing in the religion of their upbringing. But I had zero exposure at all, with the exception of maybe being in a church once in a while for in a Christmas play. But I had no exposure whatsoever. No.
Now, Professor Shulman, your experience growing up, I understand, was a bit different. I don't know if it was the yeshivish upbringing, but certainly you had a very strong Jewish education. Can you talk a little bit about your journey, both your Jewish upbringing and how you landed in the Catholic Church?
Well, I did. It was technically it was a conservative congregation outside of New York City that I grew up in. The rabbi, my hometown rabbi, some people may know the name, Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg. He was pretty big shot, author of a number of books and head of the American Jewish Congress, I think, and stuff like that. And he came from a line of Hasidic rabbis, actually, and his ordination was Orthodox. So anyway, it was on the observant side of conservative Judaism for sure. It was also in the 50s when things were more observant anyway. And I was very enthusiastic. I went to Jewish religious education from first grade until I left for college. In my high school years, I became I don't know what the right word is, a follower of Shlomo Carlebach, who I think some of your listeners probably know who he was. And I actually spent the summer between high school and college traveling with him in Israel as one of the, I don't want to use the word groupies, but one of the young teenagers who were singing and dancing with him every evening in his prayer meetings and stuff. And I took it all I had a passion for God. And I did actually feel a wonderful religious presence in those prayer meetings and around Shlomo Carlebach, and actually in synagogue also, but the height of it actually was that period with Shlomo Carlebach. And when I went to university, I started out as a member of a kind of a little bit hippie-ish Jewish counterculture community. There was a lot of pseudo Hasidism in those days. I don't know what to call it, but kind of, this kind of hippie movement, blurring the boundary with Jewish mysticism or whatever. The leader of that was Rabbi Arthur Green, who's still a very prominent figure in, I don't know what you'd call that. What is it called? Modern Orthodoxy, maybe? I don't know exactly what the terminology would be anymore.
Yeah, modern Orthodox movement, yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, I took it all very seriously. I went to MIT. I lost my belief in God at MIT under the, pseudoscientific worldview, that you're not allowed to.
I'm sure not the first nor the last.
No, it's like in good conscience, you're not allowed to believe in God. We know better. And I went on to Harvard Business School, as you mentioned, and I became a professor there. And by then I was atheist. And I was very depressed because life had no meaning. And I had this love of God that I didn't think I was allowed to exercise, And so I was in a lot of darkness, and I was walking in nature early one morning. And I think the technical word is theophany, but I just received this experience where I was walking along, lost in my thoughts. I didn't believe in God at all. And I had basically given up any Jewish practice except for gestures, on the high holidays and stuff like that. And when I received the extraordinary experience, I was just walking in nature, and from one moment to the next, I found myself in a state of intimate communication with God. I knew it was God. I didn't know who he was. I certainly didn't think it was Jesus, that's for sure, in his divinity, and seeing my life as though I had died, and I was looking back over my life after death. And I experienced everything as I would after I died, and I saw my life as I would after I died, and I saw everything I'd be happy about, everything I would wish I had done differently. And the biggest part of this experience was coming into the direct knowledge and experience itself of God's extremely personal love for me, that he had knew me by name, been watching over me every moment of my existence, had cared about me every moment, had cared about everything that happened to me, had cared about how I felt at every moment, had been arranging everything to be the best possible thing, and that every action had a moral content that was recorded from.
How did you know that we're going to take our first break in a second,
Please.
But how did you know that God, or that experience of God, was connected to the historical figure we call Jesus?
Oh, I didn't.
Church as opposed to the God of your youth.
No, I didn't at all. As a matter of fact, I couldn't think of it as, let's just put it this way, the God of the Old Testament, because it was such a personal relationship with God, which is not reflected in the Old Testament. And I'm not a prophet, and I'm not a king, and I'm not a priest. Ordinary people didn't have this one-on-one relationship with God. So I couldn't think of it as Judaism in the Old Testament. And I prayed on the spot, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow to worship and serve you properly. Literally, I prayed this. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become Hindu. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian. I literally prayed that. And he did not reveal who he was to me. I mean, I knew he was God, but that's all I knew. And I knew he was my personal Lord and Master, and the relationship that I described. I had, not only did I have no idea that it was Christ, but it was the one thing I wasn't willing to tolerate.
Well, we're going to take our first break. We're here with Professor Roy Shulman and Melissa Presser, both born Jewish. We'll get to that. One would say still Jewish by Jewish law, but practice Catholicism enthusiastically and are willing to be here on the air on a Jewish network talking about that very particular journey. We'll be right back. DocuVax is a sponsor of Equal Footing. Thank you, DocuVax, for quite a while. It's a very easy to use digital locker for your medical records. It's accessible on your laptop or your smartphone, whether you have an iPhone or an Android device. Just look up DocuVax, D-O-C-U-V-A-X. You can safely store and get validated all your basic medical information with DocuVax, including immunization records, lab results, X-rays, MRIs, etc. It's very easy. Snap a photo of a result, send a PDF file, download it any way you want, and for just $6.99 per month. As a DocuVax subscriber, you get to access, of course, all of your medical records organized along function and meaning. You also get medical professionals on call for you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to validate your vaccine records, your blood tests, or anything else in your locker. And you can give a reference to get a specialist appointment, so you just don't have to pay your general practitioner for a visit. You get something that you really need with a specialist. DocuVax keeps your medical data secure in a HIPAA-compliant digital storage facility. It's only available to you and to a doctor or insurance company or a school or anything you want to share elements of your locker with, but only through your proprietary QR code-based sharing systems. Your data is secure at all times. Again, sign up for DocuVax on your iPhone or Android device, or go to the DocuVax website, that's DocuVax.com, or if you're interested in group discounts, you're a small business owner or a school, you want to sponsor DocuVax subscriptions as a benefit, call 859-1933. If you say you heard about DocuVax on Equal Footing in the radio program, you get special group discount. That's 833-859-1933. Put an end to worrying if you or someone you care about is up to date on a particular vaccine, blood test, or an important preventative screening. Take control of your medical file. Sign up at DocuVax.com or download the DocuVax app. Right, I know that we've hit on a good subject because I'm already getting the, I'll say it delicately, upset communications. Some applauding us for addressing these types of things. Others always feel like their hackles are raised. I'm sorry, but this is real life. Do you know that there was a recent study that was put out by one of the a U.S.-Israeli bilateral organization looking at conversion amongst the Jewish community. So 5 years ago, there were only 15,000, not only, I should say it's a sizable number. 5 years ago, 15,000 or so Jewish individuals in the country of Israel converted to Christianity. About two-thirds of those, interestingly, to Protestant strains and evangelical strains of Christianity. We'll get back to that. And about one-third, mostly to Catholicism, some to like Russian and Greek Orthodox churches and so forth. That seems like a big number, but do you know today that number is more than doubled? It was over 30,000 last year. So something's going on. One could argue that it's simply kind of freedom of more freedom of intellectual and spiritual movement. There's certainly a lot more conversions to Judaism as well as there were relative to the number of the past. That's a different show, guys. Talk about issues around conversion to Judaism and church. Tonight's show is about conversion trends from Judaism to Catholicism. But there's a complicated history here. Melissa, I hope you'll be willing to open up a little bit about this. We talked pregame about some of the opprobrium that you've received, and I just begun to receive even just putting this program on the air on this topic. And I think part of that has got to be about the history. I mean, we could have a whole show on the persecution of our people, the Jewish people, by the Catholic Church or by state organizations as sponsored, blessed by, and motivated by the Catholic Church. We talked about the Inquisition earlier. Pope Francis recently made some news by kind of disavowing the Christian efforts to convert Jews in the Holocaust, which was widespread, and even up until 10, 20 years ago, it was not seen as a problem historically. So in a certain sense, there must be a sense of betrayal by a number of people that you've come across in your personal life, where people feel like you're kind of going to the enemy side, for lack of a better way of putting it. Can you talk to that? Am I right, or am I embellishing?
No, it's difficult. Roy and I do two different things in terms of, media and things like that. And God, if it wasn't for Roy, sometimes I don't know what I would do. I mean, he's just such a wonderful, human being and put out so much information that's really helpful to me personally. For me, I'm very active, just to give you an example, I'm very active on Twitter. My ministry is really focused on mental health and healing within the Catholic Church. I talk a lot about the sacraments and things like that. So that's sort of like a little history of what I do, separate and apart from being an attorney, and it's through my writing. And I recently had a conversation on Twitter, and it started to just kind of like fall apart. And really what it was talking about was that people started attacking me and telling me that you're no longer a Jew. You're not allowed to call yourself a Jew. You're not allowed to call yourself anything that has the word Jew in it, even Ashkenazi. And they went on further to tell me that I wasn't allowed to celebrate Jewish holidays. It got pretty bad. It got very bad. And what's interesting about being online, and I don't know, if Nicholas had a different experience than me, but I don't encounter that in real life. My husband's Israeli. His whole family's Israeli. His first family was Hebrew. We were both very Jewish. And my husband's a convert as well to Catholicism. He came into the church the year after I did. And in real life, The Jewish community has been wonderful to me. Whether it's in my family or my friends or Rabbi, or whoever. I mean, people are sort of confused, but I don't think I've ever received backlash. So I don't know if it's the stigma of the internet. But it's interesting to me that I guess people, because they're offended by me for whatever reason, think that they're able to tell me how I self-describe myself. And I have to tell you, just as a Jewish person, that's very painful. It's a very painful thing to go through, and it's sometimes confusing, in terms of how that all plays out. But I don't know in real life that would happen. So I sort of attenuate that to possibly social media.
So in your personal life, you don't feel attacked by other verbal attack, of course. I mean, by other Jewish people who feel like you somehow betrayed, the people of Israel. This is something more that happens in the social media sphere when people are abstracted or anonymous.
I mean, that's my personal experience. I have friends, as I'm sure Roy does, in every religion. I have good friends in every religion. I still have a lot of Jewish friends, and I still celebrate the Jewish holidays, and I never, ever had somebody say, you don't watch it here, ever. So, again, that's just my personal experience. We come from two very loving families, and very grateful and blessed to have Israeli in-laws and a wonderful, wonderful family on both sides. But yeah, that's just been my personal experience. I'm not quite sure why online it's different or the rate is different. I don't know.
So Professor Shulman, you're not a Jewish theologist, but you have some understanding. It sounds like your work, you look at the intersection of Judaism and Catholicism theologically, and there's a tricky dynamic here around identity that Melissa is getting to. That in Judaism, if you're born as a Jewish person or you convert to Judaism through an Orthodox conversion, there's no such thing as then but not being Jewish anymore. You can be an apostate, you can kind of reject your Judaism and even convert to another religion, but it's pretty clear in both Torah and oral Torah that you still remain a Jew. Now, how do you feel about that? Do you consider yourself a Jew in the Catholic?
Yes, I never use the word convert. I mean, I use it if somebody else uses it. I don't start a fight with them. But no, I consider myself a Jew in the Catholic Church, period. I was Jewish before I became a follower of the Jewish Messiah. I had been wrong about who the Jewish Messiah was or who he wasn't. I became right about who the Jewish Messiah was. This is, of course, my perspective. And so I went from being a Jew who was blind to the coming of the Jewish Messiah to a Jew who was an enthusiastic follower of the Jewish Messiah. And from my perspective, it makes me more Jewish, not less Jewish.
Yeah, and we had a show a couple of weeks ago, coincidentally, on the concept of heresy and Abrahamic faith and veneer, and they kind of don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But does this boil down? And I'll ask this question to both of you. Let's start with you, Professor Shulman. Does this boil down to your view of the Mashiach?
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for the fact that you see the historical figure that we call Jesus as the Messiah, would you? I mean, is that really the key difference?
That's the only difference. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. It really bothers me when people think, it's about the person, it's about me, it's about what I prefer. Either Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, in which case I'm on the right path, or he wasn't, in which case I'm on the wrong path. But it's not like he was the Jewish Messiah for some people and not for other people. So, and there's nothing wrong with being wrong, right? Lots of people go through most of their life being wrong, probably me too, most of the time. But it's about who Jesus was, that's all.
Melissa, do you agree? Is this really all boiled down to whether the historical figure we call Jesus was the Mashiach? And yes, but what do you call on that issue?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still Jewish. I always tell people, being Ashkenazi, when I had my children, I went for a blood test. They didn't say, hey, by the way, are you Catholic? I had to go to the same blood test for K-shots and all of those things. Nothing changed. I mean, Roy's right. I became a Catholic, and and my mother's Catholic. I mean, my mother's Jewish. And all those things. But that's the only difference. It's 100% correct.
Okay, we're going to take another break in a minute. I find this fascinating. We'll get a little bit more into the Messiah belief, because, of course, this gets kind of complicated. And there's a long history of different claims of, messianic status, and there's also a significant difference in terms of proselytism between seeing the historical figure we call Jesus as the Messiah, and having that view, and then feeling like your life mission is to convince others of that. Then becomes more of an evangelical or proselytic mission. We'll get back to that after the break. Really grateful to Professor Roy Shulman and Melissa Presser talking about their journey from Jewish upbringing to Catholicism. We'll be right back.
Sponsored by MCCS Dermatology, your experts in skincare. With 2 Manhattan locations and 4 offices in Long Island, including Plainview and Commack, the dermatologists and skincare surgeons at MCCS are proud to be affiliated with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, New York Presbyterian Hospital. So schedule your next skin exam at one of NBCS's convenient New York area locations. To make an appointment, go to www.nbcs.live or call 212-661-DERM. That's 212-661-3376. You could even schedule a virtual video visit with NBCS's 4 certified dermatologists from the comfort and safety of your own home. So go to www.nbcs.live or call 212-661-3376. And don't forget to mention Equal Footing for 15% off all cosmetic procedures.
All right, losing my religion. We're talking about the peculiar journey from Judaism to Catholicism. I don't mean any offense with the word peculiar, just very unusual statistically. And we're joined by 2 individuals, Melissa Presser, an attorney, Professor Roy Shulman, author, former marketing professor at Harvard Business School, and a theologian talking about this personal journey and also more broadly speaking. Already have some questions from listeners. Thank you for participating. You can again text in your questions or comments 917-428-4062. To do that, you can also call in and participate. We'll take a caller in a moment. And 718-303-9090. A couple of listeners have wanted us to distinguish between forced conversion and conversion by choice. And absolutely right. If you're listening carefully at the outset of the hour, we said that we're talking about willful conversion. Of course, in medieval Iberia and Spain, there was systematic conversion of Jews to Christianity that was by force. And of course, for centuries after, there were crypto Jews, kind of hidden Jews in Latin America and North Africa, sometimes called Marranos. We're not talking about that very interesting phenomenon tonight. Also not talking about Jewish people that converted either authentically or inauthentically to hide from the Nazis. We're not even talking about the Catholic practice of the church during the Holocaust. It was significant, again, topic for another show, of the efforts to convert Jews to Christianity in anticipation of the Wehrmacht advance. Talking about contemporary willful conversion. And before the break, Professor Shulman, we made the distinction between kind of a proselytic attitude and a non-proselytic attitude around the view of Jesus as Mashiach. And, that's, I think, as Jews, what we're more used to, at least maybe in New York City, like the Jews for Jesus folks that will sometimes accost you on the sidewalk and saying, okay, this Jesus person was the Messiah, and you must recognize that. How do you guys feel, Professor Shulman? How do you feel about it? Do you feel part of your mission as a Catholic is to get other Jews to realize that they, missed the boat in terms of figuring out who the Messiah was in your view? Or
It's more than that. It's much bigger than that, you see, because obviously, if Jesus was the Messiah, And if Jesus did change the fundamental relationship between man and God and change the nature and structure of worship and the sacramental life, sacraments being things done on earth by people that change the relationship between heaven and earth, essentially, then there's something very sad, actually. I don't want to offend anybody, but that the Jews who brought salvation to the whole world through Jesus are missing the primary benefits of what they brought to the rest of mankind. So it's really, and this is true of every other Jew. And I wrote a book. My second book is a collection of Jewish to Catholic witness testimonies called Honey from the Rock. You mentioned it. Every Jew I have ever heard of, I've ever read, or I've ever met who has entered the Catholic Church has their love for the Jewish people and their identification with the Jewish people spills over into a desire to share the wealth with them.
So beautiful, Elizabeth. Do you feel compelled to kind of quote unquote share that wealth?
The word compelled is a very strange word to use. How about eager or inspired? That's right. I feel.
Hang on a second, Professor. I want to see. I hope you still have what's online. I just want to. What's your view on? Do you feel like you feel very driven to try to kind of show other Jews the light?
I wouldn't describe it as that. To me, I was always on a search for truth, right? And I think that for people who share, especially Jewish people, sort of that innate drive for truth and purpose. I think it was very similar in thinking that science converted, where she says, she has a famous quote that says, her life was just one long search for truth, one prayer, truth. And being a prior, I'm giving an analogy, being a prior criminal defense attorney, every time I would get a case, I would always say, I'm on a search for truth, right? I don't know what the truth is in this case, but I never set out and said, this person did it, they didn't do it. I always had an open mind in that regard. And I think I was open for a variety of reasons to what that truth was. And especially in the mental health journey I've had, and the Lord talked about the sacraments and the sacraments here, which are so godly and have helped me in so many tremendous ways. I feel compelled to tell my story. To help other people who are suffering. Because my particular ministry deals with mental health in the Catholic Church. I do feel compelled to share the truth and to live out my faith the way that, God has placed it on my heart to do that. I'm not standing on a street corner. I'm just talking about my experience. And, I find sometimes just by talking about my experience, including my personal experience, that is very offensive to people. So, like I tell people on Twitter, it's a free world. If you want to come on my page, come on my page. If it offends you, the truth is offensive. That's just the way that it is. So that's a little bit about my point, I guess.
I appreciate you guys both being so real about that. Just for listeners' edification, very briefly, we've mentioned Edith Stein a couple times. This is an individual who was declared a saint and a martyr, I think, by Pope John Paul II, maybe 15 years ago or so. And she died as a Roman Catholic nun. I think her name was Sister Teresia. I think there's something. Sorry if I did any listeners, I got that wrong. However, she was born a Jew, and along the way, she was a pretty well-regarded philosopher and an atheist. And the controversy here, and it actually gets to my next question, is that the Vatican claims that Edith Stein, Sister Teresia Benedicta, was martyred because of her Christian faith. The facts seem to militate against that she was really murdered in Auschwitz because of her Jewish blood. Either way, it gets to the question, Professor Shulman, I think that Elizabeth, I know from a couple of our comments that listeners have alluded to that this is an organization, putting aside your relationship with the historical figure called Jesus or with other figures like the Mother Mary. The church itself is an organization that has been tied to the persecution, torture, and murder of Jews for millennia. And that's abated very significantly recently, but it's still still very fresh. It goes into my grandparents, both family were Holocaust survivors, and and yet I have Catholic family. I have great love for many Catholics in my life. It would not occur to me to ever convert, irrespective of the any personal experience I might have. And I think you could probably resonate with certain listeners that would feel that way. What do you say, Professor Shulman, to someone who says, if you have a relationship with Jesus, good for you, but how could you affiliate with an organization that has tortured and killed our forebears?
First of all, let me just back up and say I know exactly what you're talking about. And you asked about me evangelizing Jews, but the truth is I spend most of my time evangelizing Catholics, including to the truth of the history of the interaction between the Jewish community and the Catholic community, and actually educating them as to just how bad the history has been, because they tend to think Jews are paranoid and are imagining this because their history goes back about 30 years. So, you're in that sense, you're preaching to the choir, if you don't mind that expression. I don't want to offend anybody. I don't know how many Catholic listeners you have right now, but very often when I talk to people about entering the Catholic Church, and when I talk to Jews about entering the Catholic Church, I basically say, you essentially have no choice. You have to hold your nose and enter the Catholic Church, because that's where the sacraments are. The sacraments, in the days of the temple, right? The temple sacrifices really did result in the remission of sins, right? I suspect you would agree with that. The sacramental system of Old Testament Judaism has gone away with the absence of animal sacrifice. There is a parallel, you could say, sacramental system within the Catholic Church, which I am totally convinced is for real. And it does do what a sacramental system is supposed to do, including the remission of sins, including the changing the relationship between divinity and humanity, actually, allowing for an infusion of divinity into humanity, which is not possible without the sacramental aids. So it's very unfortunate, in some sense, that God entrusted his relationship between humanity and divinity to a human institution largely populated by corrupt men, and who also have the natural tendencies to all of fallen human nature, that has so kind of polluted what, is actually established as a relationship between God and man.
I greatly appreciate the intellectual honesty there about needing to hold your nose around some of the institutional transgressions, worse than transgressions over time. Just, being able to disconnect that from elements of faith. Melissa, do you feel the same way? Do you feel like you kind of have to hold your nose around the institutional history? Is that kind of water under the bridge for you?
I feel the same exact way. My friends always laugh at me. I got a bit of a humor, and I always say, I'm still a Jewish girl sitting in a Catholic church. I am a Jewish girl sitting in a Catholic church. I totally agree with everything that's said. And I also agree with him. I'm not preaching to Jewish people. If you see me on Twitter, everything that I do is hashtag on Catholic Twitter. Catholic, I'm Catholic media. I think you and I even spoke about before the program when we were talking earlier. I've never done any kind of Jewish media, nor has anybody reached out to me to do Jewish media. I only do Catholic media, like Roy does. So, I feel exactly the same way, and just what he does, because there's a lot of done in a Catholic church. So that's what we're doing.
So we've had a couple callers patiently waiting. We're about to go to a break, but let me take this first caller, and then if you're still waiting in line, please wait till after. Let's see, caller on line 3, you're on the air. Can you hear me?
Hi, is that me?
Yes, that's you.
Great. Okay, first of all, I just want to repeat what you said, that I'm compelled to share the word and the truth. So to my 2 Jewish friends over there, who are Jewish from the day they're born to the day they die, regardless of how many times they convert, get onto Chabad.org and learn about your heritage. I've heard somebody say, actually, I had a nun in my house who converted to Judaism, and she attended the Chocham, and she told me that ignorant Jews believe their religion, and intelligent non-Jews convert to Judaism. So these lovely people who sound really very sweet, who are distorting a lot of the things that they're saying, but it's okay, I'm not here to argue with them.
Let me ask you a question. When you ask that question, just so we can make it a concrete question, when you say how much of their Judaism was Jewish, what do you specifically mean by that?
I mean, do they keep Shabbat, Kasher? Do they keep the family purity laws?
You mean now or before they converted?
Before they became, they converted. Because, I mean, you know what? I know somebody who was looking for Judaism, and in her household, Judaism was 2 times a year they went to synagogue, they never did so much more.
If I can say so, I don't think the caller has been listening since the start of the show. Okay.
I really appreciate that.
I don't think she listened to the first part of the show.
Just for listeners, sorry, Professor, just to restate the question for listeners that may have had difficulty hearing. And caller, thank you for calling in. We welcome all points of view. I think the question is, prior to the conversion, were you Shomer Kashrut? Were you Shomer Shabbat?
Yeah.
Did you kind of...
Yeah, I talked about that. Look,
fully immersed in the Jewish...
You're hardly a disciple of Shlomo Carlebach. You're hardly living with him and traveling with him if you're not Shomer Shabbos and kosher and all of and that and the family purity laws and so forth. You're not even Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg's favorite parishioner or whatever the word is if you're not. I wasn't. I don't know how to put it. I would say that my level of observance was more or less parallel with modern Orthodox. I mean, it wasn't at the Hasidic level, but it certainly, this woman was not listening to the first 10 minutes of the show or whatever when I talked about that.
Okay, Melissa, in your case, it's different, to be fair. Well, I don't want to put any words in your mouth. Do you feel like you were fully immersed in Jewish life prior to your conversion?
Well, see, and I think that's a deceiving question, too, because even amongst Jews, right, Jews are going to do if you're Orthodox, if you're really a Jew, if you're a Reconstructionist, I was raised in a conservative temple, so I did go to synagogue every Saturday. I went by myself. I did not go with my parents, and I was bar mitzvah. So I definitely had a different upbringing, but I was immersed in Jewish culture, Jewish youth group, everything that was around the conservative movement. Definitely not Hasidic or Orthodox, but I was a conservative Jew.
All right, Melissa Presser and Professor Roy Shulman talking about their journey from Judaism to Catholicism. We've got some great listener comments and questions. We have another patient caller we'll get to after our last break.
That's me in the corner. That's me in the spotlight.
On the air. This is largely a labor of love, but there are costs involved. One of our wonderful sponsors for some time is Manhattan Medical. Where it bears similarity to tonight's program is Manhattan Medical's dedication to talking about things that are hard to talk about and merit airtime, and that in this case is erectile dysfunction. If you're unable to have enjoyable sex as an individual, as a partner, it can affect many aspects of your life, both in terms of physical and mental well-being. Manhattan Medical utilizes a new effective treatment called gains wave therapy. It can help you or your partner achieve excellent results. It does not involve expensive blue pills, and therefore it doesn't involve those side effects from those pills. Many people cannot take those pills as a result of other comorbidities or conditions. Manhattan Medical's gains wave therapy for erectile dysfunction is non-invasive, it's surgery-free, it's painless, and for the vast majority of patients that receive, you get wonderful results. It's been around Canada and the European Union for some time, just taking effect in the United States. Call Manhattan Medical for a free consultation. If you heard about Manhattan Medical's ED treatment on equal footing, you get a free consult. That's right. It's a $250 value. You just have to mention equal footing. Call 888-ED-CURE-9. That's 888 ED-CURE-9, or in numbers, 888-332-8739. That's 888-332-8739 to get Manhattan Medical's consult on erectile dysfunction. You do not have to be in Manhattan or the New York area. You can do a teleconsult from anywhere in the United States. Break the silence on this difficult issue. Get help for erectile dysfunction. 888-332-8739. All right. We've got, usually when listeners send in a note and about the numbers, I won't usually quote it on air unless there's a source. In this case, there is a source. And there's a listener pointing out that a Pew Research Institute study, we love Pew Institute on this program to do non-biased, great statistical and actuarial studies and reporting. In the United States has shown that over the last 20 years, there have been significantly more Catholics that have converted to Judaism than Jews that have converted to Catholicism. Now, as most of our Jewish listeners know, Jewish conversion itself is a tricky thing because many of our listeners would not consider a conversion to Judaism as kosher, so to speak, unless it was through RCA or some other organization in the Orthodox world. However, I think that's an interesting kind of factoid. We are not trying to make a value judgment on individual life journeys. This is the show about a reality that exists out there. We've also got several interesting comments, Melissa, that I want to kind of direct to you, and I'm going to coalesce them about what it's like to be in a multi-faith household. I think a couple listeners are fascinated to hear, as I was prior to the show, that your husband is Israeli, presumably Jewish. How does your family life work, where it's not like you both grew up in a different faith and you decided to compromise? You both grew up in the same faith, Judaism, and you left. How did your husband feel about that? How do you communicate that with your children, if you're willing to talk about it?
Well, I don't know if you heard me earlier. My husband converted to the Catholic Church the year after.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah. So we're both Catholic, and we're very involved in the church, both of us. And my kids are being raised Catholic.
I see. And is his family in Israel? I know your family is not that religious, but how does his family feel about it? Were they religious? Are they religious? Jewish faith?
I'd rather not talk about his family. I try to keep it private. I'm the one who chose to media, so just for the sake of respect, my husband, I prefer to.
Okay, sure. Sounds fine. We'll get to a couple of other questions in a moment. I'm going to take a caller waiting for a while on line 2. Line 2, you are on the air.
I wish you would have had somebody on who was, you say you want to do that next, that's a mistake. You should have had someone on to challenge these people who go from Catholic to Jewish. That's another week's show.
Well, it sounds like you're going to help on that front.
No, I'm not. That's your business, not mine. I just want to say to these people, they can do whatever they want, and that's fine for them. I guess they're happy. But the harsh reality of history is that Christ has looked the other way for the last 500 years. He looked the other way in the Holocaust. He looks the other way against with the Catholic Church and their own people, priests who pedophiled and hurt children for years. And you people are interested in accepting that religion. You believe Christ is for you. But he's turned his back on millions upon millions of people, and the greatest need was never there. That's why I don't find the Catholic faith honest and religious faith. That's all I have to say.
That's a powerful statement.
And it's fact.
Yeah.
And it's fact.
Professor Shulman, how do you feel about this caller's point of view?
I think it sounds to me like the caller thinks Christ is God, because if Jesus was a fraud, then how could he be responsible for turning his back on the Jewish people during the Holocaust? He was been dead for 2,000 years. The only way you can blame the Holocaust on Christ, or say that Christ turned his back on the Jewish people for the last 2,000 years, is if you think Christ is God. I don't see the logic in his position.
The audio for a second. Are you conflating the historical figure we call Jesus with God? Oh, I'm trying to get your audio. All right, sorry. Now you're back on. Are you conflating Jesus with God? Do you see the point here?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sorry. Caller, I'm talking to.
Yeah. Here's the point. As far as I know, the Catholic Church says Jesus is the Son of God, which means Jesus said, I am the Father. According, if you believe that stuff, then he is God. I mean, what do you read, sir? I'm not a Catholic. I'm not even very religious. But Christ said, I am the Son, I am the Father, and whatever I do for the Father.
Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? What do you, I mean, where are you from?
Yeah, so Professor Shulman or Melissa, I understand. I'm going to do it at a slightly lower volume, but I totally understand the caller's point of view here, because as Jews, we are, and you talk about Jesus as the Mashiach, we are taught, and my understanding of the theology is that Jesus is a direct representative and the Son of God. So, what's wrong with that?
Hold on.
That conflation. I mean it generally. Explain theologically what's wrong with this caller's logic.
What's wrong with the caller's logic is, if Jesus was not anybody special, which I'm sure that's what the caller believes, then how can you blame the last 2,000 years of history on Jesus? You can't. You can blame it on the Catholic Church. You can blame it on Catholics. You can blame it on Christians. No problem at all. You can blame it on God if you want, but you can't blame it on Jesus. I just don't get it.
I think I'm going to delve into theology a little bit here, because I think that logic doesn't really hold in this case, because if you believe that the historical figure that we call Jesus was the Mashiach, then you shouldn't have this type of chaos and evil.
Oh, I agree. That's why I said the caller sounds like he thinks Jesus was a Mashiach, because that's the only way that his point makes sense.
I'm positing that logically. If Jesus was the Mashiach, then, I mean, one has, we acknowledge that the Holocaust happened. There's chaos and evil in the world, but the Mashiach, for an observant Jew, hasn't come yet. But in the case where you believe the Mashiach has come, how do you explain?
Oh, no. Then you can blame it on Jesus. That's absolutely fine. Blame it on Jesus. That's fine. If you think that Jesus was the Messiah, then you can blame the unfolding of world history on Jesus. No question about that. My point was just the caller seemed to be blaming it on Jesus, which would imply that he thought that Jesus was the Messiah.
I see. All right. We're going to run out of time. It's a fascinating topic. I honor you both for being on, and I hope you don't feel, certainly from my side and from Paul's side, just, people want to understand this better. Let's just conclude very, very briefly from each of you with, if you take the perspective of compassion for our listeners, what would, Melissa, what would be your kind of parting words on this topic to, build bridges, help people understand where you're coming from, or create connectivity? Just, if you would, 30, 45 seconds, that's all we got.
I just want to say, I love the Jewish community. I was raised as part of the Jewish community. I really understand how people feel. And just as we have a civil discourse, I would hope that going forward, that if people have questions for me and they want to put my page or talk to me, that they have that same level of respect, that we can have a conversation and not an argument.
Okay. Professor, thank you. Professor Shulman, what are your last words to listeners?
To pray. Just pray, because that's the business God's in. Just pray to God. God, I think these guys are nuts. I think Jesus was nobody. But if I'm wrong, I want to know. That's it.
Thank you both. Professor Roy Shulman, Melissa Presser, appreciate you guys being on. I happen to believe, almost never turn my point of view, I happen to believe that God is one, and that we're all part of one family, and I respect your journey, and I wish you both great blessings and aslacha, and we'll get you next week, and I'll have you both on the future program.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for praying. The point I was just making was that the callers had no internal logic to their positions, either of them. The argument that only somebody who didn't know Judaism would change from Judaism or enter the Catholic Church is nonsense, because, among others, essentially the number one rabbi in Europe became a Catholic, Eugenio Zoli, Israel Zoli, the chief rabbi of Rome, and Charlie Rich certainly knew his Judaism and so forth. And the other caller blaming, what? Now there's sound. The other caller blaming all of the persecution of the Jews on Jesus is a pretty strange thing. If Jesus just died 2,000 years ago, then he was hardly in a position to prevent the Holocaust. Anyway, yeah, you must be hearing me now, as far as I can tell. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for praying. And I'm exhausted. I need a drink. Okay, maybe I should take a poll. Should I have a gin and tonic or should I have a scotch and soda? Never mind. Should I have a mimosa? We'll see. Goodbye for now. That was a lot of fun, though. So I'll go back to the opening screen. I don't know why. I had put on that music, of course, the harp, no, I'm just going to disappear. I'm too tired of this opening screen business. I'm just too exhausted. So I think I'm just going to do this. Goodbye. Thanks for watching.